I'm going to go ahead and get the meeting called to order and welcome everyone and do introductions. So I'll start here on my left.
Hi, I'm Hillary Riley from the City of Springfield.
Gino Grimaldi with the City of Springfield.
Gary Gillespie, Lane Transit District number 5.
Kate Reed, Lane Transit District number 7.
AJ, Lane Transit District.
Bill Johnston, Oregon Department of Transportation.
Fighting fifth.
Franny Brindle, ODOT.
Brenda Wilson, Elkhorn.
Oh, he did.
Jeff Kearney, City of Coburg, sitting in for Tom Boydell.
Patty Giannoni, City of Coburg.
Sarah Maderi, City of Eugene.
Justin, City of Eugene.
Lucy Venice, City of Eugene. Pedro Sheets, Lane County.
Pat Farr, Board of County Commissioners.
Sid Lykin, Lane County Board.
Christine Lundberg, Springfield. And let's start here. Go right in the room. Oh, are you the first in? Yes.
Patrice Brand, Hunt Point, and LTD.
David Reeser, Lane County. Tom Schultz, LTD.
Kelly Hale, LTD. Kelly Clark, Elkhorn. Ellen Courier, Elkhorn. Anna Newman, Springfield.
I'm Amy Joyce with ODOT.
Rob Interfeld, City of Eugene.
Ronnie Riley, River Road.
Rob Zake of Energy Transportation.
Welcome, everyone. The first thing on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. I have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next item is adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments or announcements from MPC members? Okay, seeing none, moving right along. I have no cards for comments. Do we have some? We
Walk
don't.
slow because someone's signing up right now.
Okay. Okay. I do have one sign up, Rob Zagel.
The complimentary first pitch.
Good morning, Chair Lundberg, members of the Metropolitan Policy Committee. You know, I just feel bad if nobody signs up and speaks to you because you feel like you're not serving the public. Just really quickly, today I want to applaud the City of Eugene, Mayor Vinas, Allen, Councilor Zelenka. The City of Eugene has adopted Vision Zero as a policy, as you know. A couple of years ago, I'm a member representing BESC of a task force, the Vision Zero task force that's been working to develop a plan. There is a draft Vision Zero plan that's out for public review. I just want to let you know this afternoon, I think in the atrium, from 3:30 to 6:30 is a public open house just to see what the ideas are for saving lives on our streets, and it's great work. I mean, all the jurisdictions are doing great work. Today, I just want to highlight Eugene because they've got an open house. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Drive safely when you go to that.
I'm riding the bus today. Safest mode of transportation.
Okay, so that was the only speaker signed up. So I'm going to just start right down the agenda. The first item is an Oregon House Bill 2597. And I know that Paul's name is attached, but he's not here today.
Yes.
So is there
Madam
any
Chair, we
lead-in?
have Amy Joyce from the Oregon Department of Transportation, and she has some information to pass out to you, and she'll make a presentation on the House bill that passed regarding distracted driving.
Good morning. My name is Amy Joyce. I'm with the Oregon Department of Transportation. I'm in our Office of Government Relations. I'm a legislative liaison. In that capacity, I represent several divisions of ODOT, our Transportation Safety Division, as well as our DMV and our Motor Carrier Division. So I was asked to come down and speak a little bit about House Bill 2597, which is the update to the distracted driving law that passed during the 2017 session and as of October 1 is now in effect. I want to real quickly, if I may, go back to some of the background as to why the legislature updated this law during the 17 session. So overall statewide, we saw pretty big spikes in fatal car crashes beginning at late 2014 into 2015 and 2016. And so that was a huge problem. It reversed about a decade of reductions in fatals on Oregon highways, including city streets, county roads, and state highways. So it was a 10-year reversal of gains and improvements. And in September of 2015, we were asked to come to the legislature and kind of address this growing problem. And so the department did some analysis and found this big increase began about October of 2014. So we were before the legislature in September of 2015, and one of the things we did was it was preliminary data, but we took a map of the state and indicated what kinds of crashes were happening, causing fatals to whom, were they vehicles or pedestrians or bicyclists, what have you. And one of the things that became abundantly clear was the number of crashes, fatal crashes, that were lane and road departures. So people just veering out of their lane into oncoming traffic, or veering off the road and hitting a tree and dying. And for some of these things, you could find a relatively clear cause: impairment, frequently, speed, often. But for 50 or 60 of these, there was no apparent reason for this crash. They weren't impaired, they weren't speeding, the weather wasn't bad, that sort of thing. And the hypothesis, at least, was that much of this was due to distraction. And the reality is, when law enforcement comes upon a fatal involving a single driver in this kind of situation, frequently they're not going to go to the really difficult process of going through phone records or anything else to determine, yes, this person was on their phone or texting or what have you. So we don't have a lot of good data on distraction, and particularly cell phone or electronic device use, but there is a hypothesis that that's a lot of what's going on and that it's tremendously underreported. So ODOT gathered together a task force, including ODOT, OSP, and AAA, worked together over the interim on a number of fronts, one of which was about legislation. And a big reason for that was a Court of Appeals decision from 2015, I believe, the Robinalis decision. It was a Dewey case. But the reason the person was pulled over was for use of a cell phone. And what the Court of Appeals ruled was that because the officer couldn't articulate that they saw the person actually tapping out a text or speaking into the phone, they couldn't say they were calling or texting, and that's all the law covered, so that got thrown out. You could have a glowing object up to your head next to your face. That's not enough for an officer to ticket you for using a cell phone while you're driving. And the effect of that, what we heard anecdotally from law enforcement, is it just absolutely handcuffed them in terms of enforcement. Ticketing just went down tremendously. It was incredibly difficult to enforce. So there was a need to update the law and get through that that decision from the Court of Appeals, as well to update the law generally. So the law had been on the books, I think, since 2009, and it prohibited cell phone and texting use. It allowed for hands-free if you were 18 years of age or over, and it had a number of other exceptions. And sort of the feeling, too, was that we've sort of moved past some of these exceptions that may have been more relevant or more acceptable, frankly, back in 2009 when we were first able to get this law on the books. And let's look at those exceptions, and maybe they're not appropriate anymore. So a couple of different bills were introduced. 2597 was one of them. There was also Senate Bill 2 from Senator Courtney, which effectively took the DUII laws and transferred it onto distracted driving and that level of severity of punishment or consequence for a distracted driving conviction. 2597 is the one that made it through the process. There were several public hearings, a lot of public interest. I think by the end we were up to the -28, the 28th version of amendments before the bill could make it through. There was a lot of compromise and a lot of change to the bill, but the bill did make it out and made it through the process. and really passed pretty handily in the end. So we do have an updated distracted driving law. I want to reinforce that again. Some folks think, oh, this is this brand new thing. Really, it's an update to a law that's been on the books for 8 or 10 years. Everybody knows they're not supposed to be using their phone or texting when they're driving. This law added electronic devices of any kind. So, no, you're not supposed to use your phone. You're also not supposed to be reading a book on your Kindle. You're not supposed to be typing on your laptop, that sort of thing.
And you mentioned shaving before too.
Oh, yeah, well, technically, an electronic razor, electric razor, I think would fall under the prohibition, and certainly we heard stories from law enforcement about any number of things that people are doing in their cars that they see folks doing and really shouldn't be, but
How about smoking cigarettes?
like an electronic cigarette.
You know, well, you've got the little cigarette lighter, that's electronic, you know.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Who has lighters in their car?
Yeah, it's an option anymore, I think. So that's a great question, and I think, I think one of the lessons about this bill is a lot of the items here are open for some interpretation. There are differing opinions about what some things in the bill mean, and I think we'll see litigation going forward through Court of Appeals cases and that sort of thing to make sure we know what things mean. But roughly, the basics of the bill and attached to the bill that I sent out is a one-pager kind of real plain language summary that ODOT put out about what the bill does and doesn't do. So the general message is focus on driving and put away the distractions. But basically it's illegal to drive while holding or using an electronic device, cell phone, tablet, GPS, iPod, anything at all, okay? There are a number of exceptions or affirmative defenses. It depends in the bill, but for most lay people, the idea is you can probably not be ticketed if one of these things applies. Again, hands-free, if you're 18 years of age or over, again, that has always been the law. A number of folks think that's new, but if you're under 18, you can't be even using a hands-free device. If the device is built into your car, so an infotainment system in cars that I know I can't afford, but for those who can, those built-in things, that's legal to use. If you're going to use a single or one touch, so folks will, mount your cell phone on the dash, and maybe you've got your GPS going, and maybe you swipe. Or maybe you've got it on speakerphone and somebody calls and you swipe to answer, that is legal. One swipe or one touch. If you're calling 911 and nobody else is available to call, yes, that's legal. When you are parked at the side of the road or in a parking lot, now you can pick up your phone and use it. Stopped at a stoplight, stopped at a stop sign, stuck in traffic, no, that is still illegal. And then we get into a little more down into the weeds. Truck drivers with their built-in CBs, that's okay. Utility truck drivers in certain circumstances, that's okay. Ambulance, emergency personnel, law enforcement in their official role, that's okay. And ham radio operators over the age of 18, that's okay. Another feature of this bill is the increase to the penalties. So now your first offense, if that doesn't contribute to a crash, that is now a Class B violation. The presumptive fine is $260 on that. Second violation, or if your first violation contributes to a crash, that's a Class A violation, $435 ticket. Third offense in 10 years, Class B misdemeanor, minimum fine $2,000. On your first offense, if it doesn't contribute to a crash, a court may, if it chooses, send you to a distracted driving course. The department is in charge of setting up some pretty minimum standards for course providers to apply and say they've got a distracted driving course. Then they can be put on a list of acceptable kinds of courses, and then it's up to a court, each individual judge or court jurisdiction, to decide which, if any, course they're going to send people to. And they don't have to do that. But so that course, if the person completes it, they can get out of the fine on that first ticket, but that conviction's going to stay on the record. So that's roughly the bill. You know, in sort of in my conclusion, and I'd be happy to open it up to questions. You know, I think this bill was a huge improvement over where we were, just in terms of getting rid of some of the exceptions, expanding it to some other devices beyond just the phone, and then really dealing with that Court of Appeals case that just hampered our law enforcement and their ability to enforce this pretty clear distraction and traffic violation. It's not a perfect bill. It's not a perfect law. And it's certainly not a silver bullet that's going to fix all of distracted driving and end fatals on our highways. I've gotten a lot of questions about, you know, this isn't going to fix everything. What about the messy hamburger that everybody's eating apparently while they're driving? No, it doesn't address that. But let's face it, we've all driven and seen lots of people on their cell phones. They're either, you know, weaving out of their lane, or they're stopped when the light turns green and they don't go, or whatever it is. And this should actually go a long ways towards helping with that problem. And I also just want to mention, coming out of that task force that I mentioned, that ODOT, AAA, and OSP put together, other distracted driving efforts, education, lots of PSAs. We've got a Drive Healthy campaign going where you can download an app and compete against each other about what, you know, how good of a driver basically you are, how much you're avoiding distraction, to kind of put a positive spin on that. So we're doing some other things as well. But anecdotally, we're hearing that, at least in some jurisdictions, they're writing an awful lot of tickets. And also, I heard an officer at a recent safety conference say that a semi-truck driver stopped him and mentioned to him that from their wonderful perspective, where they can see down better than the rest of us into what people are doing, that driver was already seeing a significant decrease in the number of people using their phones, and I'd call that a win. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
Alan?
Related to truck drivers and bus drivers, can they just use their CD or can they use a cell phone?
Let's look at the lab. So let's see. So CBs, if it's, I'm going to do air quotes, permanently installed in the vehicle, you can use a CB. Now, permanently doesn't mean it was factory installed. It can be, you know, it's most of the time it's attached in the vehicle. Now you can use a CB. Cell phone, no. I mean, a big rig driver can't be on their cell phone at all. That's federal law as well. There's a specific exemption in here because CDL drivers come December 1st, I think, have to start using electronic logbooks, electronic logging devices, or ELDs. And some of them are in, it could be a separate device. It's certainly electronic. It can be in a cell phone. But that's a device that shouldn't be used while you're driving anyway. But no, big truck drivers should not be using their cell phone at all.
The other question I had is about eating food. And I know that's not included here, but is there any data about that and how distracting that is and how many accidents that causes?
So I think the answer is no, in terms of data. What I can say is that, I mean, ODOT maintains data on crashes caused by distraction, and then as a subset of that, crashes caused by cell phone use. And certainly there are more under the distraction heading than cell phone use, and that could be, I suppose, it could be a hamburger, it could be staring off into space, it could be, you know, helping your kid in the back seat, whatever it is. So no, we don't have data. I do want to come back to, you know, when we had the task force, we looked at very seriously trying to do a second bill that would be a general distraction. So we'd have a cell phone or electronic device bill, and then on top of that, we'd have a second sort of general distraction. And we spent months, we went rounds and rounds with attorneys and everybody else trying to figure out how to craft a bill that had any kind of guidance to a person about what they could and couldn't be doing, which was incredibly difficult. And then to also guard against or to deal with the issue of folks being pulled over for reasons other than doing something that violates the law. And we never could come up with something that satisfied I know Washington State has something going right now, and I think we'll be very interested in how that goes. And certainly those are issues. We did what we could. As they say, that politics is the art of the possible.
Yeah.
And so that's what we were able to do this session. Yeah.
One more comment, I noticed that upgrading my iPhone to the 11 operating system, 11.03, it has a feature in it that stops messages from coming in, text or phone, if it senses that you're driving or moving. You can disable it, but it is a cool little feature that automatically happens unless you do something about it, which is, I think, a great feature. All of them should have that. Good reason to update
Yeah.
your operating system.
Gary?
Yeah, I didn't look thoroughly through this, but I'm assuming or hoping there isn't any sort of an emergency exemption for legislators driving, is there?
There is no exception for legislators, and in fact, you may have seen the news about the legislator who got a ticket earlier this week,
Yeah.
perhaps, or over the weekend. Right.
Well, I'd actually have to commend the legislature, because for once, you had people dealing with a relevant bill that was relevant to their lifestyle. Because you can roll up a ton of mileage as a legislator.
Sure.
Just going from where you are to Salem and then going to Eastern Oregon. I mean, so it's commendable that they worked on this and came up with this.
Yes, Bill?
Related comment, focusing on pedestrians, I read that the state of Hawaii and some other cities and states are focusing on pedestrians. There are laws prohibiting people using phones while they're crossing in crosswalks. They're part of the problem
Yeah.
in that context. Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's the city of Honolulu.
Yes.
And, right, yeah. It's pretty interesting.
This is not pertinent really, but regarding legislators, so the special provision in the law, because during session, we were exempt from driving laws that weren't felonies.
I've never heard that as.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, during session, the legislator is exempt from driving laws.
That actually goes back years, because my grandfather from Roseburg to Salem would travel about 90 to 100 miles an hour, and he was exempt.
So I would imagine that's a wink and a nod kind of a thing. There's nothing on the books that says they're exempt. But, I mean, I've heard of plenty of
That
legislators
they're
getting.
exempt,
Huh?
but there's nothing in the books regarding this particular piece of legislation. Because, yes, the legislators are exempt, I can vouch for that.
I'm going to be fascinated to look that up. I've always,
Talk to
I've
Greg
had
Smith about it.
legislators confess to me about their, speeding tickets they've gotten and everything else. So, yeah,
Only in session.
Just in session.
Yeah.
I'll check it out. Thank you for that information.
So I don't know if anyone else is interested in what Bill brought up about walking and on sidewalks, but a lot of folks don't even bother to get to the sidewalk, and I'm thinking bus riders in particular. You're just on your phone and you get off the bus, and sometimes you're walking in front of the bus instead of the back, so nobody sees you coming. Anyway, so I would be interested to know if there's any work being done on something around pedestrians. Maybe particularly around the university, maybe we just did it around the University of Oregon or something, get those students off their phones long enough to get across some of the streets. But I'm just making that, of course, we're not going to single out any group, but it is always a concern, particularly with younger folks that are on their phone, and we do have them crossing busy streets after schools and things like that. Is the idea that you need to get across the street before you get on your phone, or get off your phone before you get into the crosswalk, or trying to just run across the street. But I would be interested in something like that, and I don't know whether anybody's looking at it, and you're shaking your head, Bill.
Well, I think Rob Zako mentioned earlier the City of Eugene's Vision Zero plan. I'm sitting on that committee. There's a workshop tonight. That plan is not finished yet. I need to talk to city staff and see if it says anything about that, if it's relevant. Maybe there's a bullet that could be inserted in the plan that at least talks about it.
I would be interested on that, to have it be a multimodal look as well, because I see plenty of bicyclists on their cell phones running through intersections, and it then becomes unsafe for everyone at that point as well. So if we're gonna look at pedestrians, we should look at all modes of transportation.
Good suggestion.
Yes, so I'm looking maybe for a head nod, whether or not we'd be interested in even the state looking at, when is it appropriate to be on your phone when you're actually even more vulnerable, and when you're a pedestrian or on a bicycle or something, and the opportunity to be severely injured goes up exponentially, is to take a
Great.
look at cell phone use
Okay.
in those moments. Okay?
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amy. Okay, next is our federal transportation performance measures, and Kelly Clark. Okay, oh, of course.
Sorry.
Let's see if we get blinded by the light. I guess it's okay.
Okay, this is
Except you can't see it.
a carryover from last month's busy agenda item. This is a report on transportation performance management and an update on the federal performance measures and targets. Okay, so as we know, the Federal Highway Administration has been working on transportation performance management. And so in general, what is it? It's a strategic approach that uses system information to make investment and policy decisions to achieve transportation system performance goals. And those goals, national goal areas, are listed here. And the intent overall is to address national goals in our plans and our projects, and then to ensure accountability and transparency in our processes. So how did this evolve? MAP 21, which was adopted in 2012, and then FAST Act, which was signed into law in 2015, established national performance goals, and they also established a performance and outcome-based transportation program requirements. And since then, the United States Department of Transportation, through 2016, 2017, and earlier, have been establishing these goals, national performance measures, their data sources, and metrics. And this all happened through a series of robust public engagement processes. And so now that we're at the point where state DOTs, MPOs, and public transportation providers need to establish targets to meet these measures. And once those targets are set, state DOTs and MPOs must include them in our plans and then link them to investment priorities to set targets and report on progress. And so there's 4 major areas of measurements. The first is safety, and then performance and bridge condition, system performance, freight and CMAQ, and then transit asset management. And the federal rulemaking describes the applicability of the measures and tells us what data are needed to support the measures. And they also include target due dates, so when we need to establish those targets first. So state DOTs need to establish targets 1 year from effective date of final rule, and then MPOs have 180 days after the state DOT sets their targets to set ours. The rulemaking also describes performance periods, reporting requirements and timelines, and then defines a significant progress determination, or are we meeting what we've established? And just so we're all on the same page nationally, the FHWA rulemaking also established definitions for measures and targets. And so measure is an expression used to establish targets and to assess progress towards achieving that target. And those are the pieces of the rulemaking that were established by FHWA. The targets are a quantifiable level of performance or condition as a value for a measure to be achieved within a time period, and that time period required by FHWA. And so, again, state DOTs, MPOs, and transit providers are responsible for setting these targets. So a snapshot of the timelines that we're working with. Safety performance measures were established by rulemaking April 14th, 2016. The state DOT, ODOT, established the state target for safety performance measures in August through the Safety Transportation Action Plan. And so we as an MPO need to establish safety targets by February 27th of next year. And so we'll talk more about that in future meetings. And then pavement and bridge condition and system performance, freight and CMAQ measures. The state needs to establish those measures by May 20th of next year. And then the MPO needs to establish them by November 16th. And then transit asset management plans need to be established by transit providers by October 1st of next year. So a lot of moving targets and dates with these that we'll be tracking. And now I just want to give you an overview of the measures within each of these topic areas. So safety has 5 performance measures: number of fatalities, fatalities per million vehicle miles traveled, number of serious injuries, and serious injuries per million vehicle miles traveled, and the number of non-motorized fatalities and non-motorized serious injuries. And again, ODOT has established targets for these, and we'll be looking at these over the next couple months and bring a recommendation from TPC back to you in December, and then hopefully adopt some targets for our region in January. The pavement and bridge condition measures, there's 4 pavement condition measures and 4 bridge condition. These will be mostly the responsibility for ODOT to manage and to establish, but we will be hopefully supporting what they have established, and then they'll be responsible for reporting on that. But they all look at percentage of the pavement that's in good condition and bad condition on both the interstate system and non-interstate system, and the same with bridges. System performance of the national highway system has 3 measures, and looks at travel time reliability, and freight movement, again, looks at freight reliability measures. And the rulemaking establishes kind of a data set to use nationally that can help us quantify these measures.
What's reliability mean?
It looks at basically how reliable is a corridor, like are there big variances in what people can expect to get through that corridor in any given time. And so basically the data set with that looks at your GPS systems and how fast people are, or how reliable, again, are people moving through from point A to point B. CMAQ, condition mitigation air quality, has 3 measures, and the first 2 look at peak hour excessive delay and non-single occupancy travel, and those 2 measures will only be required to apply only to urbanized areas with a population over 1 million until January 1st, 2020, and then that threshold changes to more than 200,000. So for the first 2 years of this program, these measures will not apply to Central AMPO, but after that, we'll have to start looking at them. So the third is measured to as an assessment of the CMAQ program, looking at on-road mobile emissions, and those emissions will only will only be applied to the CMAQ-funded projects. And so we'll know more about this one as ODOT starts setting their targets, and we'll understand that a little bit better. And then transit providers have an asset management program measurement, and they'll be required to establish a transit asset management plan and a process to count and categorize their assets, to assess the condition of assets, to use asset condition to rank assets in importance to a system and agency, and then to prioritize agency funding to improve or maintain those assets. And it does apply to all fixed operators in the region. And then there's some reporting requirements that go along with this. Safety targets will be reported annually. And then progress towards the PM2 and PM3 targets will be reported every 2 years. So we'll have a baseline performance period due in October of next year, and then 2 years later a mid-performance report, and then a full performance report will be due in 2022. And so then with those reports, FHWA will look at, have we met those targets? Are we making significant progress towards those targets? And as an MPO, we really won't have a whole lot of implications if we don't. That happens more at the state level, where the state could be required to obligate a certain amount of funding to meet certain targets or allocate in a different way. The MPOs more so have to kind of explain why we might not be meeting a target or address in our plan better ways to do that. But we'll be coordinating with ODOT and FHWA throughout that target setting and reporting process to make sure that we have achievable outcomes. And so, as I said, we'll be coming back to you more as we know more, as the targets are set by the state. And then, like I said, for the first round of target setting is safety. And so we'll be talking with that with TPC this month, and then coming back in December and January for our recommendation.
So I've got a question on the CMAQ. So it says that we will be measuring PM10 for our CMAQ projects. Do we measure PM10? I mean, how is that done?
We do.
We do have monitors for PM10?
What we do is, as part of the project application process, we have to calculate an estimate of what the reduction in PM10 will be as a result of that project. So that's how we're doing it.
So it's an estimation?
That's right.
It can be
Okay.
modeled, I believe.
It's
Could
modeled?
be, could
Okay.
be.
But not actual measurements of the air quality or anything like that?
I know a little bit about this, yes. It's almost like traffic modeling. There's data collected to establish a baseline condition. There are monitors around the metro area that collect air samples,
Okay.
carbon monoxide, other compounds. And then there's an air quality conformity process that an MPO goes through when the regional plan is put together, if they're in a non-attainment area. And so those things can be modeled. I'm not sure if this is a non-attainment area. It is, yes.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps, perhaps.
Can you just tell us what PM10 is?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine, but, you know, that because each one of them is different.
The coarse particulate matter, so like smoke or dust, pollutants.
Okay.
I might add, to clarify, it's a measurement, microns. So PM10 is bigger than PM2.5. There are new regulations over the last decades that focus on the smaller particulates are actually a bigger health concern because they penetrate deeper into our lungs and they travel farther. So that's why there's more of a concern, an attempt to regulate 2.5.
It's just, I think it's just helpful for us to understand, you know, we're trying to meet requirements, but it's difficult if you can't go, oh, it's dust and smoke. It's helpful to have them in terms that we can figure out exactly what we're trying to address. Great, thank you. So, other questions? Yes, Lucy?
I may just have missed this when you said this. So this is coming up with the sort of basic measures and targets, as you said, and they will be applied to federal highways, and also does the state then apply these to state highways as well, or who's gets targeted in the end?
Right. They'll apply to the interstate and non-highway interstate system. So basically, each measure kind of has its geography in a different way. So the safety measures apply to all roads. This reliability looks at interstate system in the state and the non-interstate NHS. So those are kind of your arterials and up, and collectors in some cases, not local streets for the reliability measures.
Are there other questions?
And non-interstate NHS are typically arterials that freight run on within the city.
So we'll see more of this though, because we have to adopt.
We'll have to adopt the safety measure or targets first, and then over the next 6 months adopt. Well, no, I'm sorry, until November. We'll have until November of next year to adopt the other measures.
Okay.
So we'll be bringing back some more specific information about each of those measures and targets and recommendations.
Okay. Alan?
Are there model performance measures that people can adopt, or is each one one-off?
You model.
Like suggested ones that came with the legislation from
There are.
DOT.
There are, and FHWA has provided a lot of guidance on how to achieve some of these targets or how to address the measures via targets. We went to a training actually this last month that gave good recommendations for each of those, and so I think the state will be following that, and we'll be able to follow along with that.
Okay.
Yep.
So, but you'll just be bringing those back for us to
Absolutely.
look at
Yep.
and make some decisions
Yep,
about.
and we'll be able to make decisions based on, this is just an attempt to give you an overview of what's to come, and then we'll be able to dive in deeper with each of those as we have more information from the state, and as the state does adopt those targets that we need to look at.
Great. Alan?
So we'll adopt the measurement tool. Was there any requirement to do anything about it?
We'll need to report on it. And so, for example, with the state safety measures, and the Transportation Safety Action Plan, the state has established targets for each of these measures. We, as an NPO, can either adopt our own target, or we can decide to support what the state's measures are, state targets are. If we support, the state, we don't have to have a quantifiable number, like we'll have whatever X amount of fatalities, we'll just be supportive of whatever the state's adopted. And so then we'll report on those annually, whatever those, we'll report on our number of fatalities and fatalities a million miles traveled, and et cetera.
Right. Well, I'm a firm believer you can't manage something you don't measure, so measuring is the first step. But so this doesn't, there's no requirements to do anything about this. That all comes later after you look at your data and see trends.
Right, and what we've been told is that there's no kind of implication for an NPO not meeting its targets. That kind of happens at the state level.
So what about ODOT? What if they don't meet their targets?
They may have some requirements to obligate certain funds towards those, to help meeting those, or we can also have the opportunity to adjust our targets if they're just not realistic and we're not meeting those. There'll be some options as we move along, I think.
Okay,
Any other questions? Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, next is our report, the OTC annual workshop, and looks like Lane County and ODOT.
Commissioner Lycan was at the workshop, so was Franny, and David Reeser was too, so.
So if, Madam Chair, if you're okay, I wouldn't mind inviting David Reeser to come up as well, just to be part of the.
Thanks, put you on the spot, David. It was last month, but.
It was last month, but as he was in the background diligently taking notes and sending me texts on what to say. No, just kidding. No. And of course, Franny was there as well, and so this was actually pretty interesting because I will tell you, this got started off really strange, and the reason why is because the original questions that came to all the acts from the OTC were probably some of the most awkward questions I think I've ever seen. And so the good news for me, and I think for our act, was this. We weren't the only acts that thought the questions were really awkward. And so I think all the act chairs who delivered felt the same exact way. So once the OTC began, the questions began to not, because here's one of the questions they asked immediately, without giving us a number, how much would you like to spend on certain projects without a number in on what we can spend on? And so that was, so there's talk about awkward. The good news is, instead of that, they began to focus more on, here are some of the scenarios that we would like to take a look at. The OTC. The OTC primarily had three scenarios. Scenario 1, Scenario 2 were fairly similar, except flip-flop a little bit. One was more toward enhance and a little less toward Fixit. The other scenario was more toward Fixit, a little less to enhance. And the third scenario, which really didn't get much traction whatsoever, was very little to no to enhance, and almost all fix it. And the only enhance was actually the projects that were mentioned in the House bill itself. So that one pretty much went by the wayside. There wasn't really much interest in that. And it's my understanding they really, I kind of heard a little bit, but they still have not made a decision on what are the scenarios. And am I getting that right, Fran?
Right, they'll make
Yeah.
that, they threw out the third scenario, they left the two scenarios.
Yeah.
They're gonna talk about them in November and gavel down in December.
Right.
Both of them have some enhanced money in there.
Right. And what was interesting, except if you were to listen to specific acts or specific commissioners or elected officials from each area, there was more of a focus or more interest on, when you look at the major pinch points in the metro area, I-205, 217, I-5. I-5 probably clearly got the largest share of interest because that's the major corridor north-south to the state of Washington, and especially the Rose Corridor was mentioned quite a bit. So from Lane County's perspective, we talked a lot about Fixit for obvious reasons, the fatalities that have occurred here in Lane County. But we also talked about really transportation, what it means for our just from a local perspective, what it means to each of our communities. We talked about the non-highway issues, so whether it's bicycle, pedestrian. We talked about economic development. Freight and rail were really mentioned a lot by wide range of all the ACT folks. There were conversations and mentioning of both of the transload facilities, the Treasure Valley as well as the Mid-Willamette Valley. So those were conversations as well. It was actually kind of pretty great to hear the broad perspective of all the acts throughout the state, and yet our voice was pretty darn consistent in of each of the areas. Fixit is going to be very important, I think, for all the acts, no doubt about it. Unless you get up in the metro area, they fix it, yes, but clearly enhanced, that's going to be a big issue. Safety was a major piece. And safety goes into public health. And so that's kind of a snapshot of really what was mentioned overall. There was a lot of conversations about transportation, what it means for economic development in each of our jurisdictions. And so I felt, walking into it, when I looked at the original questions, I thought the conversation was going to be, has the acts, has their usefulness kind of over with here? I mean, honestly, you get those questions, you're thinking, boy, what are they thinking here? It was quite the opposite once you got down to having the conversation with the Oregon Transportation Commission, the questions that they were asking, how they were focusing on afterwards, and the conversations they were even having afterwards. They strongly believe the acts continue to have a very, very viable presence. And after going through some of the, especially when we went through the Connect process the year before, so now Connect is was part of the transportation package. We scored projects, each of our acts, and I remember our act, the Super Act, scored projects. We went up to the final meeting, and it was as if the ODOT staff, Salem, not local, Salem, took our scores, threw them out, and said, no, it's our own score. We'll determine what's more important throughout the state than the rest of from a local perspective. I will tell you, the OTC got an earful, and I mean a big earful when we had the meeting the year before. So now it really is about getting that local perspective and getting an understanding of what is important for each of our acts throughout the state. And to me, that I felt that was it was great to hear the commitment, and that was from all the commissioners, by the way, not just Chair Bainey, who's a county commissioner. That's from all the commissioners. They really that was very thoughtful, and I was very appreciative. So, Franny, David, anything else you want to add?
I wanted to add, I just wanted to make sure everybody understands the different categories between Fixit and Enhance, to remind everybody that Fixit means preservation. So it's pavement preservation, bridge preservation, repairing, etc. Enhancing is anything that's going to add to the system. And then safety is, you know, as we've talked about a lot with that all roads transportation safety, it's all data-driven based upon either hotspots or corridors that have serious and fatal injuries. And then, you know, those are, the money's targeted to those areas. So that keeps it out of the political realm and makes it really, those funds targeted to it where it makes the best sense to spend the money. So the other thing that came out of that discussion with the OTC is leverage. So, okay, so where we don't have a lot of discretion with Fixit or safety money, because they're data-driven and pretty much set. We've got pavement conditions, bridge conditions, and we've got to deal with our seismic and make our system resilient. So we don't have a lot of discretion about that. It's all data-driven. But maybe we can leverage funds, and maybe we can use these things called leverage funds and add a non-highway, perhaps, element or something that might make a difference to both a safety project or a bridge project or a PRES project. So keep that in mind, because that'll be discussed more and more in the future. And what we may do as a couple bodies with the MPO and the ACTS is let's get a really good look, and we'll be getting those soon. We're going to be getting them in the spring, because I was at another meeting where we talked about this. We'll get a 150% list for our bridges, our pavement conditions, and our safety projects. And we'll have a list, and we'll know where they're located around for the region. And we can come together as bodies and say, okay, this makes sense to maybe we can do a bike path or bike lane here, or we can do this or that, and make it safer or make it more, accessible to other modes. So keep that in mind. And so we're really working hard as an agency now, pulling together those lists of 150% lists for those things. Okay.
David, anything?
Yeah, I would just echo what Commissioner Lycan and Franny said. And again, I think one of the biggest things that I heard going around the table was really unanimous expectations that the acts continue to be involved. And I think Sid hit that on the head by talking about that, and I'm glad you brought up the leverage as well. So, but I think you did a great job capturing it.
And on the leverage piece, the one thing that, and I will mention this every single time I get in front of the OTC, especially from Lane County, as a quote-unquote timber county. And those of us who've been in office as long as we have, right, Christine?
Yes.
Anyway, we remember the days 10, 12 years ago when Lane County has significant amount of road funds and could bring in a match. And so our wonderful check this year from U.S. Forest Service will be $900,000. And traditionally, we're receiving $20 million a year. So $900,000, $20 million. I don't know about you, but one's a lot less than the other one. So we don't have that match anymore. And so when Franny's talking about leverage, I think that's a really, it's a golden opportunity, and it allows, well, and I think the expectation is we will be creative. So hopefully OTC, directing ODOT, will be creative as well in working with us. Because what does a match look like? A match isn't always dollars. A match can be made up in a lot of areas to help cover and help push a project forward. So that's really it.
Yes, Hillary.
It's good to hear that the OTC is now valuing the acts, because I think I was act chair the year that they, discarded all of our things, and our point was, they don't realize the countless volunteer and citizen hours that go into making those recommendations. And, you're invested when you spend hours and hours and hours, and that they value that. I think it makes a much stronger and better system all the way around. That's good.
Well, I think we're fortunate with Chair Boehne being an elected official as well, and coming from local government, she understands that. But I will say, the one who surprised me a little bit on that is Sean O'Halloran, who's, you wouldn't necessarily expect it because he's head of government affairs for Nike. But yet, he values local government's input probably as much as anybody. And it's kind of refreshing to hear that from an executive of a major corporation, but yet who really takes that and values that very, very much. I mean, it's really refreshing to hear the OTC members overall talk about how much they value the local input.
Any other comments, questions?
Let me just add one more thing to the Fixit Preservation. Nowadays, with the ADA settlement agreement that ODOT has just gone through, whenever we go through a highway or roadway and update it for pavement, we also have to address ADA. So we don't have to look at that as a leverage. That's a given. So Fixit means ADA, and ADA is curb cuts and signals. So whenever you're doing a signal upgrade, you have to make sure that it's ADA compliant and talks, it has the talking, so for the slide of hearing and sight. So to keep that in mind, it's a given.
Well, I want to thank you to everyone who went, particularly Commissioner Lycan for being there and representing us and, getting the feedback that we did. I think we all recognized when we were at the OMPOC meeting, it was made real clear to us how valuable that ODOT felt the acts were. And so I made a mental note that, that yes, they're very important to how we make decisions. I'll be really interested to see where it actually ends up in terms of the Fixit versus enhance, because we all can look at our lists and go, oh, I've got some of both. And what's going to be prioritized. So great. So thank you so much for doing that and bringing this report to us. Okay, next, and I keep seeing Paul's name here, but I know that that's not, it's going to be you as the introducing. Yes, are you?
Yes, so for this update, this is really about bringing back some more information based on questions that we've asked at the last meeting, and Bill and Franny will take this agenda item.
Okay, great.
I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. Instead, there's a handout coming around. And some for the audience. Franny and I have been receiving these monthly updates from the ODOT Director's Office. We've shared them with you before. This is the latest version we've got, and I formatted it so that you have the speaker notes, and I've highlighted some of the key concepts, some of which you just heard about in the summary from the OTC. This will reinforce some of these concepts for you and help you visualize them. And if you really want to get into the details, you can take this with you and read about it. It's hard to absorb it all, but I will try to hit some of the highlights if I can. So on page 2, walking through this, there are these funding categories. You've seen some of these slides before in previous presentations, but I might mention this version of the presentation is nicely done. It's more refined as necessary for the OTC workshop, so I was pleased with this version that we've got. So there are these 6 funding categories. Franny talked about some of these. She emphasized and described what Fixit and Enhance are. There are also these safety programs, non-highway programs, importantly, bicycle, pedestrian, public transportation. Local programs include funds for the MPO and the local bridge program. I have a separate slide later that goes into more detail about those. And there are these miscellaneous other functions that this describes, planning and data collection and other programs. Turning the page to slide 3, Commissioner Lycan talked about the 3 scenarios. The base scenario basically is based on the previous STIP, the 2018-21 STIP. See, I'm noting here that the local program funding is based on the amount provided under federal law and agreements with the cities and the counties. And ODOT recommended an increase in the TGM program. That's the Transportation Growth Management Program that provides funds for local governments to do plans. On page 4, there is a slide that shows the discretionary funding in this STIP. So House Bill 2017 directs funds to the specific enhanced projects named in the bill, and we've talked about those before, and that includes those jurisdictional transfers, a territorial highway, and improvements in Springfield on 42nd Avenue, and a jurisdictional transfer in Eugene, and other projects around the state, including those congestion relief projects in Portland. So these funds are essentially set, those in gray, and all of them really. So the challenge for the commission is to figure out how to distribute funds within these categories. And the next slides describe a little bit more about that. Slide 5 goes into some more detail about the Fixit and Enhance scenarios. Commissioner Lycan touched on these earlier. There's 3 different scenarios. This shows them and describes them in a little more detail. Again, scenario 1 holds constant the amount of enhanced funding, similar to the 2018-21 STIP. And factor in House Bill 2017 money. It leads to more money being put into the enhanced program than the Fixit program. So that's essentially the base case scenario 1.
And that's typically through earmarks, the House bill money.
Scenario 2 provides the same amount of federal highway funding for Fixit programs as the 2018-21 STIP. So as the result, Fixit is larger than Enhance. And Scenario 3 eliminated any federal funds going to the Enhance Highway Program. No additional money. And as Commissioner Lycan explained, the OTC decided essentially at the workshop in October, last week, a few weeks ago, to take that scenario off the table. So they want more discussion about the remaining 2 scenarios over the next couple months, with a decision of some kind in December. Moving on to page 6, Franny was emphasizing the importance of leverage. This slide discusses the state highway leverage program. And as Franny mentioned, the ACTS would recommend projects to the commission based on opportunities within the area. So there will continue to be an important role for the ACT to identify which projects that ODOT identifies that would be good candidates for leverage. The next slide on page 7 talks about a different type of leverage program. This is the safety leverage program. And this would be to add safety features to the Fixit projects. And in the slide up above, you can see there's a little difference. There's $30 million in House Bill 2017 safety money. The recommendation is to set aside $10 million for ACTS to figure out how to leverage or to assist in leveraging. So that implies that ODOT has its idea on other things that could be leveraged. But I would mention that oftentimes those are things that you would probably identify anyway. Franny mentioned sidewalk improvements, ADA improvements required for repaving projects. This is more in highway projects. You've heard me describe this before. A simple paving project through a small community used to be fairly straightforward, but now there are ADA requirements. And that can be quite involved. I can think of some towns on the Oregon coast. Garibaldi, for instance, required basically, I think, $8 million of rebuild just to enable the paving project. The crown of the road was inadequate as is, the drainage, the sidewalks, the ramps. So ODOT leveraged money. This was in the last STIP to basically completely rebuild the road through Garibaldi. So I just emphasize that even though ODOT may be identifying some of these leverage projects themselves, it undoubtedly would benefit individual communities. Moving on to page 8. This discusses that state and federal law provides direction to ODOT to include these 3 subcategories of non-highway funding, and it describes them here: public transportation, state highway fund for bicycle and pedestrian, including the safe routes to school, and the non-highway discretionary program. I won't go into detail on those, but you have this takeaway. If you want to drill down into some of the details, hopefully this will be useful for you. Page 9 talks about non-highway discretionary funding. Talks about how that money would be distributed. There's a pie chart. Active transportation leverage adds non-highway elements to existing STIP projects. Off-road trails and multi-use paths. Safe routes to school. Education. Transportation options. It's a funny term we've thrown out before. It used to be known as transportation demand management. Includes support for rideshare programs, park and ride lots, telecommuting, and information and incentive programs. Almost done here. Slide 10 talks a little bit more about leveraging opportunities for the acts, emphasizes some of the ideas we've talked about before. ODOT proposes giving the acts a significant role in selecting opportunities to add elements to Fixit projects in 3 different areas that we've talked about. ODOT staff would review the opportunities to add features to the Fixit projects, present a list of options to the acts. The acts would then prioritize and recommend projects to be funded. And as Commissioner Lyken mentioned, there was good support for this, good feedback at the workshop. The acts and the commission both provided favorable feedback on the plan. Finishing up here, slide 11 talks about the remaining process. In November, ODOT will present some additional details on scenario 1 and 2. December, there would be an approval of the final scenario. Just flipping to page A1 at the very end. This was from the previous update. A little more information if you're curious to know what's in this category called local programs. It's a little more explanation about the surface transportation program. That's the fund exchange program that allows communities to exchange their federal funds for state funds. That can be advantageous in terms of delivering projects with less red tape, less federal regulation. MPO funding, which is important for Central Lane MPO. That's where money comes from for the surface transportation program, planning function, transportation alternatives. Local bridge programs, very important program. It's money. It's provided to local communities to improve bridges not on the state system, local bridges. The Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, CMAQ, we just talked a little bit about that. That's new funds that are available here for this MPO. I talked about the Transportation Growth Management Program, and there's also this Immediate Opportunity Fund for Economic Development. That's an overview of the latest thinking about the STIP and a summary of what happened at the workshop.
So I wanted to also mention that in the slide, there's the open house, online open house for the STIP, for the 21-24 STIP, and there's a website. They will be taking comments through November 7th. It's not, the date's not written here, but it just says through November. But they need to gather the comments in so they can make a recommendation to the OTC. So letters, emails, any kind of comments that you want to make, please feel free to go on to this online open house and add your 2 cents. We've been already responding to some questions about projects specific to different project-specific questions, but there may be program-level questions that you have, like you might want to talk about how you'd like to see one program funded more than another or something. So feel free to go on there and provide input if you'd like.
Great. Questions, comments? Yes, Patty.
I have two questions. One, I forget how we define active transportation. And the other one is, I wonder if you could explain the colors on page 3 on the chart.
Active transportation refers to bicycle and pedestrian facilities. We have a new active transportation liaison in our planning group. The role is to make sure that projects that are being developed incorporate good bicycle and planning features. It refers to human beings burning calories, out walking, using feet and bicycles rather than driving in motorized vehicles. That's where that term comes from, active transportation. And the colors on slide 3, let's see. Appears to be just different colors to identify those different programs. I think the colors are maybe more significant on slide 4. Because they talk, on slide 4, the gray slides, the gray areas show things that are basically preset by formula. And the blue and orange slide talk about the big decision areas that the OTC needs to grapple with over the next couple months. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It doesn't help with page 3, but...
Oh, in terms of, oh, right, there are two different shades under safety, for instance. Let's see if it explains here.
Correspond to the page 4 amounts.
Oh, that's scenario.
It's the darker gray on 4, the state, the House bill money.
Yes.
And the other is federal money. So if you, looking at page 3, you're looking at federal versus state?
That's right. Thank you for helping me. Previous presentation, I remember putting a slide up, and Paul Thompson and I were discussing how confusing it was because it only showed the federal funds. It did not show the House Bill 2017 funds. So again, this is a more refined presentation, and these slides show the contribution of House Bill 2017 money.
Does that help, Patty?
Yes, that helps a lot. I just didn't know what I didn't know what was below the House bill. But federal funds make sense.
So legends are always very helpful for those of us that are a little graphically impaired.
What do you mean?
Not you specifically. No, if you know me, I'm always asking for a legend because I'm always looking at something, and if there's no legend, then I'm wandering around trying to figure out what the heck the graphic or map is trying to tell me.
Well, again, if you're interested, hopefully these talking points that we went through will be useful to you. The slides are a little abstract, but the talking points really explain what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay. Okay, so next on the agenda is our update on our Mid-Willamette Valley Intermodal Facility and Transload facilities. So, Alex.
Thank you. We'll just need a minute to set the PowerPoint up.
Oh. Yes. We're always at the wrong end.
Commissioner Lycan, why don't you come and sit next to Jim?
Yeah, I know, you should really. For the record, do you need coffee? For the record. We spent a lot of time on these graphics right here.
Sorry for the lack of the legend there.
This is not my username.
Everybody's got to worry with technology. All right. Thank you, Ellen. Let's see. Looks like I have control here. All right. Great. All right. Thank you for your patience. Again, my name is David Reeser with Lane County, and we have Alex Kyler with us as well, and Commissioner Lightkin as well. I'll start us out, and then I'll hand over the remaining slides to Alex. So if you remember, at the last month's MPC meeting, Commissioner Lightkin gave a brief update on the intermodal transfer facility, and it seemed like there was a lot of questions and interest about that, so we decided it would be good just to do another information presentation for you and help answer questions, and we'll have some maps in here as well. So what is an intermodal facility? Well, as most of you know, it typically in this situation or this context, it involves rail and trucking, and we look at both transport of exports and imports. And there was a Eco Northwest study that was done back in 2016. I'll talk a little bit more about that soon here, but I have a couple sources listed here and that I thought was interesting. And the majority of the Western Oregon exports are agriculture products, and I actually found that kind of surprising. I was before I had looked into this, I was thinking it was more timber-based, but it actually equates to, in 2016, about 65% of the exports were actually straw. So again, that's an agriculture export. Exports, they total more than 38,000 containers per year, and so you can think of that impact on the roads and particularly the state highways. And then imports are a little bit less, so we have, or actually quite a bit less, at least 9,000 per year.
Container means.
Yeah, these, correct, yeah, these are the containers that can be transferred from a truck to a rail. So the interest in this has gone back a few years, and but particularly some of the benefits here are increased efficiency. So again, getting truck traffic off of I-5 or reducing some of that. There's certainly some bottlenecks that we have up in the Portland area, as you likely know, and again, the idea is to try to be more efficient with rail when possible. We also have reduced transportation costs. It costs more if you are just trucking versus if you find some efficiencies in rail transport. And then, of course, the environmental benefits of rail with reduced GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. There's economic development possibilities with the connection to the Port of Coos Bay, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Also the Goshen industrial development, and that's something going back a few years. You may remember Lane County adopted what was called the Great Plan, and that was for the Goshen industrial development. And then lastly, there's some economic opportunities to expand and enhance existing transfer facilities. And as an example, there's about 12 kind of smaller scale transfer facilities in Eugene. And so there's more throughout the region. I wanted to talk just briefly about the history of the project. And again, this goes back a few years. Looking at the mid-2000s, Congressman DeFazio worked on a $5 million earmark, and that was actually to Northwest Container Services to work on a transload facility. And then I don't know all the details of that, but perhaps my colleagues do. But there's basically, it sounded like the project did move forward, so that money was rescinded back. And then the state legislature, all the way up to 2016, there were some changes in the Port of Portland that really triggered a desire to look again at the transload facility. And then they funded this study, which you see the cover of here. This was done by Eco Northwest in 2016, and it looked at is a transfer facility viable in the Willamette Valley. And so we'll talk a little more about that. Alex?
Okay, so moving on, I think in the last time you all got together, I think Commissioner Lycan spoke about the Lynn County opportunity. Lynn County, there's a couple sites up in Lynn County that are being looked at. The Albany-Millersburg site is the site of the previously now torn down International Paper Mill, and then there's a site in Lebanon as well that is being looked at. We talked initially to those folks up there about a possible partnership. Certainly we're very interested in thinking about how the Port of Coos Bay could benefit from a mid-Willamette Valley intermodal site. We've also taken a pretty hard look at the opportunities in Goshen. Goshen has got great access to I-5 and to Highway 58, so it's really got good north, south, east, and west connections, and it exists on the Central Oregon and Pacific line. The challenge for Goshen from a transload facility is that, and for most short lines, is that crossing through the UP yard is costly. So UP charges, I believe it's a per car charge to get through there, and so for many shippers, they're trying to figure out how to get. They're trying to sort of avoid the UP yard, to be quite frank. So we've also had discussions with the Coos Bay Rail Link. There's an existing, some of you may know, there's an existing transload facility that's relatively new at Green Hill Road and West 11th, and that was the reason they cited there, was to avoid that per car charge that exists at the UP yard. So that reload facility is really designed just to be able to ship directly out to the Port of Coos Bay.
Great.
Yeah. This is a good map that just shows one of the things that we've looked at pretty carefully in thinking about this site is that you know, we've got two Class 1 railroads in the state of Oregon, the UP and the BNSF. But what makes Eugene somewhat unique is that we do have a number of short lines that serve the area. So the PNW is the one that goes north up the valley. The Coos Bay Rail Link is the one that goes out to the Port of Coos Bay, and then the Central Oregon line goes down parallel to I-5. So in thinking about potentially how do we approach this opportunity, we've been thinking more and more about how to bolster access to the short lines. Go ahead. This is a better map of the Class 1 railroads, and you can see essentially the gist here is that the UP lines serve the west and the south, and if you can get on the BNSF, you're typically going more towards the east in those green lines. One of the things that I found very interesting in looking at the Oregon freight plan is that we ship a lot. In fact, our largest destination for forest products is Illinois. So I thought that was something I hadn't really realized. But so that's how much, particularly forest products, will move on the Class 1 rail lines. And just to be clear, forest products are considered for the purposes of this conversation agricultural products. And I think the other thing about our area relative to the Albany area is we do have more forest products that are coming in and out. They're, for example, when Dave mentioned the straw, they're probably a little bit better situated with respect to straw than we are, where our strength is probably in the movement of forest products.
One of the things, and if you could go back to real quickly, if you notice you have both in Seattle, which in Seattle really is Tacoma, so Port of Tacoma really is primarily where they're shipping out of from when product gets on the rail or on truck and goes up to Washington. Then you have Oakland, and those two ports are used significantly by ag businesses in Oregon. And people say Oakland, why Oakland? Oakland ships to Europe. Tacoma ships to Asia. So that's the primary function, and I have actually met with several of our ag companies from the last meeting we had till here to get an idea why Oakland, why Tacoma, and Oakland is a great when they're able to ship. They're not Europe, because they actually ship from Oakland. It's easier to cross over to the United States. Pardon me, cross over to the United States, not by ship. I meant not by ship. It's easier to cross to the East Coast to ship to Europe, and that's what I meant to say. And where in Tacoma, you just put it on ship and it goes straight to the Asian countries. So shipping, I had truck and rail in one and ships in the other. So, but shipping, that was what I was trying to.
But you're saying if it's on a rail line and it goes to Oakland, that it can stay on a rail line and go east, or it goes on a truck.
Right now, what they're doing is they're actually trucking it to Oakland.
Oh.
And the reason why is because it's too expensive to put on the Class 1s right now. And this is why the interest in the potential transload facility with our ag companies, because then you can actually put them on rail and keep them on rail the whole time. And right now you can't. So you truck them to Oakland, then they're put on rail and go east to eventually be shipped out to go to Europe.
Oh, okay, because it's the rails charges, or it's just that you've got to stop and unload and load that it drives up the cost?
Class 1 railroads are, and I'm going to use this all the time because it was Commissioner Tony Hyde that told me. Here's the Class 1 railroads. There's God, there's the railroads, there's the federal government. And you know what? There's some truth to that. And the reality is, all of our local companies are not big enough to put a contract together with the Class 1s. The Class 1s will do whatever they want. And it's whatever price they charge, conversation over with. You have two, Union Pacific and BNSF. That's it. And they can charge whatever they want. And it's all based on the amounts and how much product is going to be put on the rail and on the train to send somewhere. Even a company like Seneca, it's peanuts compared to, say, a company like Weyerhaeuser. And so that's really been a big issue.
So the other thing that we've been looking at quite a bit is that in House Bill 2017, there is this $25 million earmark for the Mid-Willamette intermodal facility, and that's really about all it says. I mean, it's pretty remarkable the lack of sort of process language and anything around. There's some 65 million or so in total would have become term dedicated projects, but there's not very much language there. If anybody wants to see it, it's section 71F of the bill. But what has happened is operationally, those dollars got essentially put into the Connect Oregon process, and in fact have basically replaced Connect Oregon. So there won't be a competitive Connect Oregon round this year. What the department ODOT did, was they wrote new rules for this year's Connect Oregon funding, and you can see these rules if you go to Connect Oregon's homepage. And essentially, the way this will work for the dedicated, there's 2 dedicated projects. I think Commissioner Lycan mentioned Treasure Valley down in southeastern Oregon. But for Treasure Valley and the Mid-Willamette, there's going to be a 2-step process. There's a pre-proposal that is required first, and that the due date for that is December 15th. And what the bill did say, House Bill 2017 did say, is that 1.5% of the amount for each dedicated project will be utilized by the department to make sure that the proposals they're getting are very sound. So this first phase is a pre-proposal application. If the department deems those pre-proposals qualified, bona fide, that they meet the minimum standards and are selected to advance, then this $1.25 million will be equally divided amongst the applicants. And the department will enter into an agreement with each of the applicants that will then have a due date for the actual project plan. And so there's criteria for the pre-proposal application, again, due December 15th, and then there's criteria for the actual project plan, which then those applicants will actually have a fair amount of resource to more fully develop with some. We don't know what the date of that submission will be yet, and it's a much more robust application, however, in that second phase. Again, the first phase is going to be selected with I think there's a view by the Business Development Department in that first phase. The second phase, there's a little bit more robustness in terms of how these projects will be recommended, with ultimately the Oregon Transportation Commission selecting one project. Now, the other thing that we've been pretty intrigued with is how to suggest that this is such a unique opportunity to have this much money, in particular, earmarked by the state. And so one of the things that I got intrigued with was looking at the infra grant is a grant program that came out of the FAST Act, and it was previously called the Fast Lane program. They've now changed it to infra. But infra is about $800 million a year for their grant program, with a minimum award for a large project of $25 million. And so it sort of struck me that what a unique opportunity we have for the first time to have this $25 million sitting out there from the state, and could a potential applicant leverage that against an infra grant. So for example, one of the things that we've been contemplating is you could suggest that there would be investment in a Mid-Willamette Valley facility, and perhaps you would then be able to leverage federal funds for more short line track improvement, or relieving bottlenecks on Class 1 railroads, some of the things that are sort of through and through freight rail plan. So I think that's an interesting opportunity. We believe, at least this year, the infra grant was due on November 2nd, which is today. So I'm assuming that the infra grant will be sometime in November next year as well. And if you read the NOFA for the infra, it really does focus a lot on intermodal facilities as well. So it's sort of an interesting opportunity, and it's something that we're still exploring. I do want to emphasize, there's a lot of fluidity here. The bill came out in July. We sort of immediately went to work on something different, which was our Tiger Grant application. And finally getting that wrapped up on October 16th, we were able to sort of pivot to this thing. But there's still an awful lot of ability for input, and we're still don't have a very congealed idea of what to propose relative to what we've seen up in Albany, for example, where they've been working on that Millersburg site for quite some time. I will say that this feasibility study that Dave mentioned assumed that an intermodal site could be as small as 14 acres. They've got 190 acres up in Albany. So in a way, I mean, it may be a bit burdensome to have a site that large, particularly due to the expense of just acquiring the site. But we don't know that. So we've been continuing to meet with folks. We met with the Portacoos Bay to talk with them about this. We're continuing to talk to various other short lines and different kinds of trade groups that I'm trying to reach the folks, for example, who ship hay out of Central Oregon to sort of figure out what their hopes and dreams and needs are for moving hay. There's an awful lot of hay that comes out Highway 58. What I don't know is, does it go north, south, export market, all kinds of different questions about hay. The second bullet there is, one of the things that we realized in looking at this is that there's a dozen transload facilities already inside the city of Eugene, well, in the city of Eugene and going north at least on the PNW up into Junction City. But it may be that there's better bang for the buck to actually just take a look at existing facilities and see if those could be bolstered to accept additional kinds of commodities or make improvements to their existing operations. These are mostly pretty small operations, but that might be something to take more of a look at. And then obviously this deadline of December 15th is coming right up. So if we're going to do something, we've got to have it done by then. And then the question of applying for the infra grant funds. And a local government can apply for infra. The port could apply for infra. The department, I think, put together a proposal. Franny, you may know, at least when I talked to the federal affairs person for ODOT, he suggested that I think it was the Abernathy Bridge up in Oregon City was going to be the topic of the infra grant for 2017. Maybe there's an opportunity to have more conversations with the department about what their priority for 2018 would be. So I think that's
yeah. So with that, we'll leave it open for any questions you have. Yeah.
Yes, Gary.
Yeah, I was just, since Southern Pacific basically left Eugene and UP took over and pretty much moved most of their facility to La Grande, I think it was. What, if any, funding is going to be available local in the rail yards here from this? Do you anticipate any?
Well, the answer would be none unless there is an application for a Mid-Willamette facility that's down here and that would suggest that there would be improvements to the yard that are made. Mm-hmm. I think Commissioner Lakin's comments are, that's a big yard. It used to be very important. Huge. And now the way they're putting trains together, and because they want them all to be fairly uniform and just trucking right on through, that site isn't used in the same way anymore. Nonetheless, it still has a toll for anybody who does want to cross through there that's not a Class 1 railroad. Yeah. So it really depends on what the proposal looks like is the answer to your question, Gary.
So we're going to probably wind up with like rail yard land there, some kind of a railroad amusement park, or.
I think that's a question for UP. I don't.
Okay. Yeah, because one thing that became obvious during the high-speed rail discussion was that there was what everybody else said and then what UP said at the end of the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Howdy. So December 15th is really close.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm not telling you anything, but at this point, would you guess we're going to end up competing with Lynn County for this, or do you honestly think we might go in together with them on a proposal? or when do you think you will know?
You want that, or you want me to take it?
Yeah, you can take it.
Because that's more of a political question.
Yeah, yeah.
Than it is a staff question. And I think really what it comes down to, as I mentioned in the last meeting, what Alex mentioned here, Lynn County is way ahead of us. I mean, they've been working on this for at least 2, if not 3 years. I mean, so they're way ahead of, I think even longer than that. And there's two projects in Lynn County competing against each other, but I will tell you, it's the Albany-Millersburg is the primary. There's one in Lebanon, but I just don't see it. And so I think at the end of the day, and one thing you have to go back to is that if Terminal 6 at Port of Portland would not have gone into the situation it did with the ongoing non-performance because of the back and forth between the management and the longshoremen, we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because Terminal 6 used to be the primary terminal in Oregon that took all the ag products and shipped them off, and it was pretty vibrant. Although all of our, or at least the vast majority of our ag companies would take their product, truck it up to Port of Portland, and it was on a ship and heading out. Well, that's been non-existent now for over 2 years. And so local companies, what they did, they adapted. And that's why they're going to Tacoma. That's why they're now trucking it to Oakland and putting it on rail and shipping it off to the East Coast to Europe. They've adapted. And in fact, if you talk to them today, they will tell you that even if Port of Portland opens back up, we've already adjusted our business practices. We won't do that anymore. We're out. And so now you have this as a possibility. It's interesting because right now I think the ODOT staff seems to like Albany-Millersburg, but we're hearing that Business Oregon doesn't necessarily like it. So you have even 2 state agencies that are quite on board. And where it's actually much easier to deal with a non-Class 1 railroad. So that's why the Goshen facility is interesting, because that rail line's called Corp, and they're a short line. They're so much easier to deal with. But as Alex said, you still have to cross over into the UP line somewhere along the lane, and they're going to have to pay a price for it. So that's so at the end of the day, I think it's a political question, and we're going to have to really work this through, not only with Lynn County, but I think with our local legislators, and ultimately with Congressman DeFazio. So I wish I had. I don't think we have an answer right now.
Well, good luck with that.
Tell me about it.
Yes, Kate.
Looking at, so if Lynn County becomes not the option, and they look to Lane County, and they look to the West Eugene site, where West 11th and Green Hill meet, there's some congestion problems in that area already. Has there been any sort of study around negative implications of that location, or are we too kind of far behind in that process to be looking at that?
Well, we've definitely talked about it. I mean, clearly, that site is challenged by where it is, on the wrong side of the Delta Beltline congestion. So, there isn't a perfect site for this kind of facility. On the other hand, there's a number of people who have taken a look at this study that Eco Northwest did and say, geez, it's not even clear that a transmodal facility is a viable solution or a viable business enterprise. So I think the beauty of that site at West 11th is that it does serve the Port of Coos Bay, and we believe that the Port of Coos Bay it really has some potential. And they're working very hard to not only improve their line, but improve their facility in Coos Bay. I don't know the exact numbers, but to run a ship down the Columbia River or up the Columbia River to Portland, relative to the cost of bringing a ship into Coos Bay, are just remarkably different. Coos Bay would outcompete Portland hands down in that regard. But there's still a bunch of improvements that need to be done out at the port. So I think that's one of the reasons why we're sort of interested in that infra opportunity, because could we help to sort of advance their efforts with those federal dollars? And that is, like I said, that's the neat part of that site on West 11th and Green Hill.
Coos Bay is 7 miles off the Pacific Ocean, Port of Coos Bay. Port of Portland's over 40. The Columbia River, basically, even dredging, and it's a hard bottom,
Yeah.
you can maybe get to 35 feet. And Port of Coos Bay is a very soft, deep water port. Without dredging is 37. And you can dredge to, I believe they've estimated you can easily dredge to 45, which allows super ships and super barges to come in, where in the Columbia River, you have challenges where you can't get any kind of ship to come in. That's why they go to Tacoma, because it is so deep, and they're able to get any ship that they want in there, where in Columbia River you cannot.
Plus, it would be really nice to make sure we don't put trucks onto 101
Yeah.
and 126.
I'm always interested in, the economic benefit for us. I'll make one comment about the OMPOC meeting. I think I heard Lynn County pretty much say, the representatives from their MPOs is, somewhat of a given that they're working on the intermodal facility without any nod in our direction at the meeting that kind of this is what we're doing. So but I made a mental note that, I wonder what we're doing, because those folks didn't seem to consider us as part of the conversation, at least at that meeting. So is it the county that's actually the lead on this and having the conversations?
I know, Mayor, we've been working with Sarah Means as well on this project, and she's been involving both Denny Bro and Courtney Riesel from your shop in these conversations. So while, for lack of a better term, yeah, we are the lead. I sort of feel like it is a bit of a ragtag team here. You can tell December 15th is coming right up, but it's a lot of money, and I think it's really worth looking at it. And we worked hard to make sure it said Mid-Willamette Valley in the bill. You, Chair Farr, Mayor Venus signed a letter to the legislature saying, when we saw that it initially, if you recall, the bill actually said Lane County in the first version. And there's a story behind that, but we managed to keep it at least to be Mid-Willamette Valley rather than a named county. So it's an opportunity, and I think a pretty neat opportunity. And so hopefully, the interesting thing about that pre-proposal is not as onerous as the second proposal. And the pre-proposal could come, for example, if there's 2 or 3 proposals, $400,000 to $600,000 would come to us to do more of a robust look. So my hope is that maybe we're back in front of this group after December at some point in time, and we're appearing somewhat more organized.
I'd like to hear December 7th, when we meet again, how organized you are.
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor Day.
Oh, yeah. There's the organization right there.
I think we're all on board for, taking a serious approach to, what would make the most sense for us, and where, all the benefits, nothing else for economic development, or just trying to move our goods and services through, our transportation system, because it's a huge impact on us in terms of everything we need to address. So I would love to see. I've always wanted to have more trains in our area. So anyway, it's a holdover from childhood, but anyway, but it makes sense to use our systems to their highest and best use. So.
I will say it eventually comes down to the class ones, and UP sometimes you almost get the feeling that they're saying, as you're looking at this, we're being serious. They're kind of looking, oh, isn't that cute?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for all of your efforts. Okay, so next is our updates and follow-up next steps. I have ODOT updates.
Yeah, sure, hi. First off, the Oregon Transportation Commission has a new commissioner. His name is Robert Van Brocklin. He's a partner from the Portland law firm Stokes Rives. He previously worked for the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation as a director and as a director of government affairs for the city of Portland.
And that was the position that we submitted a recommendation.
Region 2.
So I would imagine he'll be starting first of the year, but I'm not sure. So there's that. And Paul had asked me to kind of talk really quick about what we're doing as an agency to ramp up for these House Bill 2017 projects that are coming our way. So I thought I'd really quickly just let you know what's going on with that. So Lane County has gotten a few earmarked projects out of that. And the Region 2 has gotten a number of projects. But Region 1 and the Portland area has the most projects, and they have the most to work on right away because their success in the Rose Quarter, I-5, 217, 205 is going to tell the legislature that, yeah, ODOT's a good bet for these funds. And so we have to deliver on those projects. And so the legislature had given us 39 positions as a state to divvy up. And so as a management team, we worked on where to put those positions. Now, outsourcing is going to be our model because we just do not have the staff to take on the amount of work that we're seeing between the Fixit and the earmark projects. So we are going from about a 30 to 50% outsourcing to a 70% outsourcing model. So that means the first run of the 39 positions will be mostly in the Portland area, and then some in the Region 2, and I'm going to specifically get 2 positions that will be project managers that will be able to run contracts for design and construction. So that'll be the first, and we're hiring, working through the recruitment process to get those people on board by January. And then we get another bite at the apple for when the legislative session starts in February for an additional 111 positions. And so we have to show the case. There's another House bill, I don't have the number with me, that said that there's these positions that the agency could get. And so it identified the types of positions. A lot of them are engineers, project managers, etc. But there's some manager positions. And so we were putting a proposal forward to get a couple more area managers. And if we're successful in February, I will be coming back home to just you guys and be able to focus more on our Lane County. And so there'll be somebody else for Area 4. Same with Area 1 and 3. But just to let you know really quick of the projects that we amended the 1821 STIP at the OTC to include the projects that were early on in the package, because there's later on projects and then there's some early on. So we're talking 1821 STIP. So we've got Florence to Eugene, Highway 126 West. There's an environmental impact statement to look at expanding that road to make it, to add lanes to it, to make it safer. So we've got $3 million, and that has to be obligated by 2019. So again, we'll have a consultant that will develop that environmental impact statement. We've got some jurisdictional transfers. Territorial Highway gets the first amount of money in 18, as does Highway 99 in Eugene for a jurisdictional transfer. And then we've got some passing lanes west of Oak Ridge. That's a $7.2 million project that has to be in construction by 2024. And then there's a Fixit corridor of culverts on Highway 58, because that's our primary route it's our high priority route, and there's a bunch of culverts that are in poor and critical condition that need to be updated, and that's a $10.4 million project. So there'll be work around those, and that's what we have to get these contracts up and going for. Are there any questions on that? Yes, Petra.
I was wondering if there's any positions allocated for procurement.
Yes, there are positions for procurement. In fact, we're going to have, because contracting and IGAs have been a bottleneck for us as an agency. So we're getting more positions in procurement, and better than that, we're getting liaison positions in procurement. So we're going to have basically a Department of Justice and up to maybe 3 procurements, but 2 right now, maybe 3 procurement specialists that will be sitting with us in Region 2 that we'll be able to go directly to. And there's other things happening around trying to get more of these projects, the other projects other than House bill projects on the state, switch to state funds so that they can be delivered by local jurisdictions and certified agencies. And so we're looking at all sorts of efficiencies to get projects in the pipeline faster and better. So good question.
Was that it?
That's it.
Thank you. That was good. I mean, helpful. So next is the Main Street project. I know it's coming up on the council in a couple of weeks. So until I see that, I'm not up on anything new, and I don't know if there's anything between last month.
Your city staff and me and the consultant are refining the scope of work. We want to make sure the transit is properly coordinated, and we want to make sure our strategy for evaluating the economic impacts is feasible. So your staff will be talking with you more about it on November 20th.
Okay, great. Rail update, we probably had our rail update already, yes, pretty much. The OMPUC, of course, I had the paper, the back of the agenda with all the notes, saw it on my desk, went, oh, I don't need that, and didn't bring it in here. So the only thing that sticks out in my mind at the moment is the 50% that was for safe routes to schools that the state was, and you can help me with it, the monies or the new monies that the state was going to hang on to 50% and then give out 50% locally, and all I could figure out is some schools are on state highways,
there's quite a lot
and so there may not be, and the school district might be outside of a city, somebody that could apply for the money, and that's why they wanted to keep it at 50%. But I know, I heard that there was some opposition from some groups about ODOT keeping 50% of the money.
Yeah, and then the state routes to school money is going to be $10 million a year off the bat and goes up to $15 million a year in 20-something, in a couple of years, 2021? Yeah, 2021. So that's a significant amount of money.
Yes.
So yeah, and we do have a lot of schools on, rural schools on state highways. Yeah. So I don't know how that'll all, the OTC will have to weigh in into that.
Yeah.
Can I jump in just real quick?
Yeah.
I'm on the rack.
You're on the rack?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Robert Feld, City of Eugene. So I'm on the rulemaking advisory committee for the Safe Routes to School money, and I'm going to be keeping our regional partners apprised of how that goes. And I imagine that'll be one of the things we talk about is how that money is, how much is set aside for ODOT facilities. I know, I think one of the issues is that a lot of the smaller communities just have a much harder time coming up with match. And if they do make them ODOT projects, then it makes it easier to develop those projects. So but obviously we'd like to see more money available to communities in the NPO. So I think there's sort of a balancing act there. Yeah. But I'll try to keep either the MPC or all the partner agencies apprised of how that goes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So is there anything else I'm trying to remember from the, yes?
Yes, I just want to let you guys know that I am the Rules Advisory Committee for the transportation transit side. So we have a really aggressive schedule, and we're already into our second meeting. So we hope to be able to clarify any of the questions that a lot of different public transportation service providers have because of how the money is distributed. Lane County, because there is a transit district, we will be what's called the qualified entity. So the money will come through LTD, and any other agency within the district of our jurisdiction is eligible. So we do have South Lane Wheels that I believe is the only other public transportation service provider. So we're looking at how that money would work. And then the other question we have is how would money for the rest of the county be allocated? If it's not through us, then what other options are there? So those are areas that we do not have answers to yet, but we are in discussion with that. Like Florence or Oak Ridge or any other transportation service providers that, although we manage them through LTD, we don't use our own funds for those. So we've got to find out how to allocate that money. If it's not through LTD, or is it through LTD? We do not know that yet.
So anything, yes, Brenda?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one thing, Chair, from OMPOC. You know, we've been talking about a statewide TIP platform, transportation improvement program. All of the MPOs, well, 9 of them, if you include the bi-state one, 8 of us. We have to come up with a list of all projects covering 4 years, and all of the MPOs do it differently. We all submit it to ODOT. It looks different. We prepare it differently. So at OMPAC, we've been talking about a statewide TIP platform that we would all chip in to pay for, and we found out this week that ODOT is willing to pay for part of that as well. And so I think that that's good news, and we'll be all working together and make sure that we get this done.
Good, great, good, okay. All right, so the Lane Act, I don't know if there is anything.
We're meeting next Wednesday.
See, we'll be discussing critical Oregon aviation grants.
That's right.
There's another review cycle. This is a new program, second cycle. There are, the airport in Crestwell has 5 different applications and 1 from Florence. So we'll be hearing some presentation about that, and we'll be going over this DIP update with them and a few other topics.
Okay, is there any next steps or the agenda? There's no administrative amendments.
No, I would just want to point to everyone's attention, Chair, to the upcoming meetings, and note that the Springfield, the meetings that will be held in Springfield will be held at the Justice Center. From now on.
Oh.
Yeah. So just make a note of that.
Okay, great, good, because we'll all show up here.
Yes.
Okay, all right, well, without further ado, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.